The first time Marcus called me cold, I was standing in our kitchen at 6 in the morning, already dressed for work, making his coffee exactly the way he liked it. 3 sugars, a splash of cream, stirred counterclockwise because he claimed it made a difference. I had been up since 5, preparing his breakfast, packing his lunch, and laying out his clothes for another day at his sales job. When he stumbled downstairs, still in his pajamas, and saw me focused on my morning routine, he shook his head with that familiar look of disappointment. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. You know what your problem is, Rachel. You're always so cold. Can't you just say good morning like a normal person instead of acting like a robot? I had said good morning. I had said it when he first came down the stairs, but he was too busy scrolling through his phone to acknowledge it. But pointing that out would only make me seem more cold, more calculating, more of whatever it was he thought I had become. So I simply handed him his coffee and kissed his cheek, the same way I had done every morning for the past 8 years of our marriage. That was 3 months ago. If I had known then what I know now, I would have thrown that coffee right in his face and walked out the door. But I didn't know. I couldn't see what was coming, couldn't see how that single word would become the weapon they would all use against me, over and over, until I started to believe it myself. The morning Marcus called me cold wasn't unusual in our household. It was just another day in the life we had built together in our suburban home in Denver, Colorado. From the outside, we looked like the perfect couple. Marcus was charming, successful in his sales career, always ready with a joke or a compliment for everyone else. I was the dependable wife, the one who kept everything running smoothly behind the scenes. I had my own career as a financial advisor, but somehow I had also become the primary caretaker of our home, our relationship, and increasingly his mother, Patricia. Patricia had moved in with us 6 months earlier after her husband, Marcus's father, passed away from a sudden heart attack. She was 68, perfectly capable of living on her own, but Marcus insisted she needed family around her during her time of grief. What he failed to mention was that he expected me to be that family, while he continued his life exactly as it had been before. Patricia had her own opinions about everything, especially about me. She had never quite approved of her son's choice in wives, though she had been polite enough during the early years of our marriage. But living under the same roof had stripped away any pretense of civility. She made it clear that she found me lacking in warmth, in spontaneity, in all the qualities she believed a proper wife should possess. "Rachel, dear, you really should smile more," she would say as I prepared dinner after a long day at the office. "Marcus works so hard, and when he comes home, he needs to see a happy face, not someone who looks like she's attending a funeral." The criticism was constant and subtle, delivered with a sweet smile that made it impossible to argue against without seeming unreasonable. If I organized the household finances, I was controlling. If I planned our weekend activities, I was rigid. If I didn't laugh at Marcus's jokes after hearing them for the 100th time, I was humorless. And if I expressed any frustration with the situation, I was cold. The word followed me everywhere. Marcus would use it when I didn't respond to his affection the way he expected. Patricia would whisper it to her friends when she thought I wasn't listening. Even Marcus's sister Linda, who visited every weekend, would shake her head and murmur about how different I was from the warm, bubbly woman Marcus deserved. I started to internalize their criticism. Maybe I was cold. Maybe I had become so focused on managing our lives that I had forgotten how to be spontaneous, how to be fun. I began to monitor my own behavior, forcing smiles when I didn't feel like smiling, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, trying to be the person they all seemed to want me to be. But it was never enough. No matter how much I adjusted my behavior, no matter how many extra efforts I made to show warmth and affection, the complaints continued. I was too reserved at family gatherings, too quiet during dinner conversations, too serious about everything. The harder I tried to prove them wrong, the more they seemed convinced that I was fundamentally flawed. My breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in March. I had spent the day dealing with a particularly difficult client who was facing bankruptcy, helping her navigate the complex process of restructuring her finances. It was emotionally draining work, and I came home exhausted, looking forward to a quiet evening with my family. Instead, I walked into chaos. Patricia was in the living room, surrounded by her book club friends, loudly discussing the latest romance novel they had read. Marcus was in the kitchen, making himself a sandwich and leaving the ingredients scattered across the counter. The sink was full of dishes from their afternoon snacking, and there were crumbs and spills everywhere. I stood in the doorway, still in my work clothes, my briefcase heavy in my hand, and felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. This was my life. This was what I came home to every day. A mess that I was expected to clean up, people who expected me to serve them, and criticism when I didn't do it with enough enthusiasm. "Rachel, sweetheart, could you make some tea for the ladies?" Patricia called out, not even looking in my direction. "And maybe some of those little cookies you made last week?" I hadn't made cookies last week. I had bought them from the bakery on my way home from work, another small lie I had told to maintain the fiction that I was the perfect domestic goddess they all expected me to be. But the request was clear. I was expected to drop everything and play hostess to Patricia's friends, just as I did every week. "Rachel's so good at entertaining," I heard one of the women say. "Though she always seems a bit distant, doesn't she? Not quite as warm as you'd expect." "Oh, that's just Rachel's way," Patricia replied, and I could hear the subtle criticism in her voice. "She's very practical, very focused on getting things done. Sometimes I think she forgets that life isn't just about being efficient." I stood there, listening to them discuss my personality as if I weren't even there, and something inside me snapped. Not in a dramatic way, not with shouting or tears, but with a cold, clear realization that cut through all the confusion and self-doubt I had been carrying. They were right. I was cold. But not in the way they meant. I was cold because I had learned to protect myself from their constant criticism. I was cold because warmth had been met with demands for more warmth, more service, more of myself than I had to give. I was cold because every time I had tried to express my own needs, my own feelings, I had been told that I was being unreasonable, too demanding, too focused on myself. But there was another kind of cold I could be. The kind that came from clarity, from seeing the situation exactly as it was without the softening lens of love and loyalty. The kind that came from understanding that I had been giving and giving and giving, while they had been taking and taking and taking, and calling me cold when I had nothing left to give. I set down my briefcase and walked into the kitchen. Marcus looked up from his sandwich, a piece of lettuce hanging from his mouth, and smiled at me with the careless confidence of a man who had never doubted that his needs would be met. "Hey babe, rough day? Mom's got her book club here, and they're being pretty loud. Maybe you could make them some tea or something?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw him clearly for perhaps the first time in years. He was 35 years old, perfectly capable of making tea himself, but he automatically assumed that I would do it.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Had made a mess in the kitchen and left it for me to clean up, just as he did every day. He had heard his mother's friends criticizing me and had said nothing to defend me, just as he always did. "Make it yourself, Marcus," I said quietly. He laughed, thinking I was joking. "Come on, Rachel, don't be like that. You know how Mom gets when her friends are here. Just play along." No. The word came out colder than I intended, but I didn't soften it. I didn't explain or justify or apologize. I simply picked up my briefcase and walked upstairs to our bedroom, leaving him standing in the kitchen with his mouth open. I could hear the conversation downstairs pause, could feel the ripple of shock that went through the house. Rachel had said no, Rachel had refused to serve. Rachel was being cold again. But for the first time in months, I felt warm. Not the performed warmth they had been demanding from me, but the genuine warmth that came from standing up for myself, from recognizing my own worth, from refusing to be diminished by their expectations. I changed out of my work clothes and sat on the edge of our bed, thinking about the conversation I had overheard. Patricia's friends discussing my lack of warmth, my distance, my failure to be the kind of woman they thought Marcus deserved. I thought about all the times Marcus had criticized me for being too focused on practical matters, too concerned with managing our finances, too serious about our future. They wanted me to be different, but they had never asked what I wanted. They had never considered that maybe I was focused on practical matters because someone had to be. That maybe I was serious about our future because no one else seemed to be planning for it. That maybe I appeared distant because I was tired of being the only one who cared about maintaining our home, our relationships, our life together. I opened my laptop and pulled up our financial records, something I did every month as part of my job as our household financial manager. It was a role I had naturally fallen into, partly because of my professional expertise, and partly because Marcus had no interest in dealing with money beyond spending it. I managed our joint accounts, paid our bills, handled our investments, and planned our budget. As I scrolled through the numbers, I saw our life together laid out in stark financial terms. I earned $68,000 a year as a financial advisor, while Marcus earned $52,000 in sales. Despite earning more, I contributed equally to our joint household account, while also paying for most of our groceries, household supplies, and incidental expenses from my personal account. I had been doing this for so long that I had stopped thinking about it, but now I saw it clearly. I was subsidizing our lifestyle, supporting his mother's living expenses, and managing all our financial obligations, while being criticized for my lack of warmth and spontaneity. I was being called cold by people who were financially dependent on my work, my planning, my constant management of our shared life. The irony was almost laughable. They wanted me to be warm and spontaneous, but spontaneity was a luxury I couldn't afford because I was too busy making sure our bills were paid and our future was secure. They wanted me to be less focused on practical matters, but someone had to focus on them because they certainly weren't going to. I heard footsteps on the stairs and Marcus's voice calling my name. He knocked on the bedroom door, which I had locked behind me, and tried the handle. "Rachel? Come on, what's wrong? The ladies are asking about their tea." I didn't answer. I continued scrolling through our financial records, making notes on my phone about what I was discovering. Our joint savings account, which I had been steadily building through careful budgeting and investment, contained $43,000. Our checking account had another $8,000. We owned our house jointly with about $60,000 in equity. "Rachel, this is ridiculous. You're being childish." Still, I didn't answer. I was too busy calculating the numbers, seeing our relationship in the cold, clear light of financial reality. I had been carrying the financial burden of our household while being criticized for my lack of emotional availability. I had been managing our future while being told I was too focused on practical matters. The knocking on the door became more insistent. I could hear Patricia's voice downstairs, probably complaining to her friends about my rudeness, my coldness, my failure to be a proper hostess. But I was beyond caring about their opinions. I was seeing everything clearly now, and clarity was a kind of warmth I had forgotten I could feel. I opened a new document on my laptop and began typing. If they wanted cold, I would give them cold, but it would be the kind of cold that came from precision, from planning, from the careful application of the financial skills they had been taking for granted. Marcus tried the door handle again, and when it didn't open, he knocked harder. "Rachel, come on. Mom's friends are starting to leave, and she's embarrassed. Can you at least come down and say goodbye?" I saved my document and closed my laptop. Then I walked to the door and opened it. Marcus was standing in the hallway, his face flushed with frustration and embarrassment. Behind him, I could hear the voices of Patricia's friends as they gathered their things and prepared to leave. "I'm not coming downstairs," I said simply. "I'm not making tea. I'm not saying goodbye to your mother's friends, and I'm not apologizing for being cold." His eyes widened. "What's gotten into you? This isn't like you." "You're right," I said. "It's not like me. The old me would have made the tea and smiled and pretended that everything was fine. The old me would have apologized for being cold and tried harder to be warm. But the old me was an idiot. Rachel, you're scaring me." "Good," I said, and closed the door in his face. I spent the rest of the evening in our bedroom, working on my laptop and thinking about my options. I had spent 8 years trying to be the wife Marcus wanted, the daughter-in-law Patricia expected, the woman they all thought I should be. I had sacrificed my own needs, my own comfort, my own sense of self, to maintain the peace and keep everyone happy. But their happiness had come at the cost of my own. Their warmth had been purchased with my coldness, their spontaneity enabled by my rigid planning, their carelessness supported by my constant care. They had built their comfortable life on the foundation of my work, my money, my endless accommodation of their needs. And when I had nothing left to give, when I had become exhausted and distant from the constant demands on my time and energy, they had called me cold. They had made my emotional unavailability into a character flaw, a personal failing, a sign that I was somehow defective as a woman and a wife. But I wasn't defective. I was tired. I was overwhelmed. I was giving everything I had to people who not only didn't appreciate it but actively criticized me for not giving more. The next morning, I woke up early as usual, but instead of making Marcus's coffee and breakfast, I made only my own. I dressed for work and gathered my things, leaving him sleeping in bed. I could hear Patricia moving around downstairs, probably expecting me to have breakfast ready for her as well. Instead, I left the house without saying goodbye to either of them. I drove to my office, but instead of diving into my client work, I made some phone calls. I called my attorney, someone I had worked with professionally on several client cases. I called my accountant. I called my bank. By the time I arrived home that evening, I had put several plans into motion. Marcus and Patricia were waiting for me in the living room, both looking concerned and confused. "Rachel, we need to talk," Marcus said as soon as I walked in the door. "Your behavior last night was completely inappropriate. Mom's friends are still talking about it." "I'm sure they are," I said, setting down my briefcase. "I'm sure they're all discussing how cold I am, how rude I was, how I failed to be a proper hostess." "Well, yes, actually. And frankly, I'm starting to wonder if—" "They're right. You've been different lately, distant and cold. I don't know what's wrong with you, but you need to figure it out." I looked at him, this man I had loved and supported and cared for, and felt nothing but a clear, cold understanding of exactly what was wrong with me. What was wrong with me was that I had been allowing people to treat me like an unpaid servant while calling me cold for not enjoying it. "You're right, Marcus. I have been cold. But not in the way you think." Patricia leaned forward in her chair, her expression a mixture of concern and satisfaction. She had been waiting for this moment, for me to finally admit my failings and promise to do better. "I'm glad you're finally seeing it, dear," she said. "Marcus needs a wife who can be warm and supportive, not someone who's always focused on business and numbers." I smiled, and I could feel how cold that smile was. "Actually, Patricia, I think Marcus needs exactly what I've been giving him, someone who's focused on business and numbers. Someone who's been managing his finances, building his savings, maintaining his credit, and planning his future." Marcus frowned. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that I've been subsidizing your lifestyle for 8 years. I'm talking about the fact that you've been living in a house that I helped buy, eating food that I helped pay for, and enjoying a standard of living that my income and my financial management have made possible." The room went quiet. Patricia's satisfied expression began to fade, replaced by something that looked like concern. "Rachel, that's not fair," Marcus said. "We both contribute to this household." "Do we?" I pulled out my phone and opened the notes I had made the night before. "Let me share some numbers with you. I earn $16,000 more per year than you do. I contribute equally to our joint household account, but I also pay for groceries, household supplies, and incidental expenses from my personal account. Over the past 8 years, I've contributed approximately $47,000 more to our household than you have." Marcus's face was turning red. "That's not how marriage works, Rachel. You can't just add up numbers like that." "Actually, I can, because I'm a financial advisor, and numbers are what I do." "Numbers don't lie, Marcus. Numbers don't get emotional or make excuses. Numbers just show you exactly what's happening." Patricia stood up, her voice sharp with indignation. "Rachel, how dare you talk to my son like that? Marriage isn't about keeping score." "You're right," I said. "It's not about keeping score. It's about partnership, mutual respect, and shared responsibility." but that's not what I've had. What I've had is a situation where I carry the financial burden, manage the household responsibilities, and get criticized for not being warm enough while I'm doing it. I could see the panic beginning to set in on both their faces. They were starting to understand that this wasn't just another argument, that something fundamental had changed. "What are you saying, Rachel?" Marcus asked, his voice quieter now. "I'm saying that if you want cold, I'll give you cold. I'm saying that if you think I'm too focused on practical matters, then maybe you should handle the practical matters yourself for a while. I'm saying that if you don't appreciate the warmth I've been giving you, then maybe you don't deserve it." I stood up, feeling taller and stronger than I had in months. "I'm saying that I'm done being your unpaid financial manager, household manager, and emotional support system while being criticized for not doing it with enough enthusiasm." "Rachel, you're overreacting," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I? Let me tell you what's going to happen. Tomorrow, I'm closing our joint accounts and opening my own. I'm removing my name from any financial obligations that benefit you, but don't benefit me. I'm going to stop managing your finances, stop paying for your expenses, and stop planning for your future." The color drained from Marcus's face. "You can't do that." "I can, and I will. I'm going to give you exactly what you've been asking for. I'm going to be cold, Marcus. I'm going to be so cold that you'll finally understand what warmth actually looks like." Patricia was sputtering, trying to find words to express her outrage. "This is ridiculous. You can't just abandon your responsibilities as a wife." "Watch me," I said, and walked upstairs to pack my bags. I spent the night in a hotel, and the next morning, I began the process of untangling my financial life from theirs. I had been supporting their lifestyle for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to have my money be truly my own. I had been managing their needs for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to focus on my own priorities. But I was about to remember, and if they thought I had been cold before, they were about to learn what real cold felt like. The warmth I had been giving them had been real, but it had been unappreciated and unreciprocated. Now, they would have to learn to generate their own warmth, manage their own practical matters, and plan their own future. I was done being their unpaid servant. I was done being criticized for not serving them with enough enthusiasm. I was done being called cold by people who had been living off my warmth for years. If they wanted to see cold, I was about to give them a masterclass in it, and this time, the cold would come with consequences they couldn't ignore. The first week of my financial independence was a revelation. I had moved into a furnished corporate apartment downtown, the kind I usually recommended to clients going through divorces who needed temporary housing while they sorted out their lives. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now taking my own advice. Marcus called 17 times on the first day. I answered none of them. He texted 32 times over the next 3 days, messages ranging from confused to angry to pleading. I read each one, but I didn't respond. Let him experience the coldness he had been accusing me of for months. By Thursday, he had figured out that our joint checking account was frozen. That's when he showed up at my office. My assistant, Jennifer, buzzed me through the intercom. "Rachel, your husband is here. He seems upset." I could see him through the glass wall of my office, pacing in the reception area like a caged animal. His hair was disheveled, his usually pristine work clothes wrinkled, and he had the wild-eyed look of a man who had just discovered that his safety net had disappeared. "Send him in," I said, straightening my shoulders and preparing for the confrontation I knew was coming. Marcus burst through my office door without waiting for Jennifer to escort him. Several of my colleagues looked up from their desks, and I could feel their curiosity even through the glass walls. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Rachel?" he demanded, his voice loud enough that I was sure the entire office could hear him. "You can't just freeze our accounts." "I have bills to pay." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Please sit down, Marcus. You're causing a scene." "I don't care about causing a scene. You've lost your mind. First you disappear for 3 days without telling anyone where you're going, and now I find out you've closed our bank accounts." "I didn't close them," I said calmly, pulling up the relevant documents on my computer screen. I removed my name from the joint accounts and transferred my portion of the funds to accounts in my name only. The accounts are still open. You just don't have access to my money anymore. His face turned an alarming shade of red. Your money? It's our money, Rachel. We're married. Are we? I turned my computer screen toward him, showing him the spreadsheet I had prepared. Because according to my calculations, I've been funding our marriage for years while you've been taking credit for our financial stability. He squinted at the screen, trying to make sense of the numbers. I had broken down every aspect of our financial relationship over the past 8 years. Every contribution to our joint accounts, every bill payment, every major purchase. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. I contribute 50% to the household account, he said weakly. Yes, you do. But that's where your contributions end. I pay for groceries, household supplies, maintenance and repairs, utilities overages, dining out, entertainment, gifts for your family, and incidental expenses. Over the past 8 years, I've contributed 68% of our total household expenses, while earning only 57% more than you. Marcus stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He had never seen the numbers laid out this way before because I had always handled our finances quietly, efficiently, without making him confront the reality of our financial imbalance. But that's what couples do, he said finally. They share expenses based on their ability to pay. You're absolutely right, I agreed. That's exactly what couples do. But couples also appreciate each other's contributions. They don't criticize their partner for being too focused on practical matters when those practical matters are keeping the household afloat. They don't call their partner cold when that partner is working overtime to maintain their standard of living. I could see the moment when reality began to sink in. His face went pale and he slumped back in his chair. Rachel, I never realized. Of course you didn't realize. You never had to realize because I handled everything. I managed our budget, I paid our bills, I planned for our future, and I did it all without complaint. Until you and your mother decided that I wasn't doing it with enough warmth and enthusiasm for your liking. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I had once found endearing but now just seemed pathetic. What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? Fine, I'm sorry. Can we please just go back to the way things were? No, Marcus. We can't go back, because I'm not the same person I was a week ago. I've remembered who I am when I'm not constantly trying to be who you want me to be. What's that supposed to mean? I leaned back in my chair, feeling more confident and powerful than I had in years. It means that I've been playing a role for so long that I forgot it was a performance. The efficient household manager, the dutiful wife, the uncomplaining financial support system. I was so busy being what you needed that I stopped being what I wanted. And what do you want? I want to be appreciated for what I contribute, instead of criticized for how I contribute it. I want to have my financial contributions acknowledged, instead of taken for granted. I want to come home to a partner who's grateful for my hard work, instead of a critic who thinks I should be doing more. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally looked up, his eyes were desperate. Okay, I hear you, I understand. Things will be different, I promise. Just come home and we'll work this out. I'm not coming home, Marcus. What do you mean you're not coming home? You have to come home. We're married. Being married doesn't mean I have to accept being treated poorly. It doesn't mean I have to subsidize a lifestyle for people who think I'm cold and ungrateful. Nobody thinks you're ungrateful. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a text message thread. This is from your sister Linda, sent to you last Sunday after I declined to host Easter dinner at our house. I read from the screen. I don't know what's wrong with Rachel lately. She seems so cold and selfish. Poor Marcus deserves better. Marcus's face went white. Rachel, I never responded to that text. No, but you never defended me either. Just like you never defended me when your mother's friends criticized my lack of warmth. Just like you never defended me when your mother herself called me cold and distant. I didn't know it bothered you so much. Of course it bothered me. How could it not bother me? But every time I tried to talk to you about it, you dismissed my concerns. You told me I was being too sensitive, that I should just ignore them, that I was overreacting. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. From my office on the 15th floor, Denver sprawled out in all directions, full of possibilities and opportunities I had been too focused on my marriage to explore. Do you know what I realized this week, Marcus? I realized that I've been living my life in reaction to your criticisms. You said I was too cold, so I tried to be warmer. You said I was too focused on practical matters, so I tried to be more spontaneous. You said I was too serious, so I tried to lighten up. I turned back to face him, and I could see the growing panic in his eyes. But I never asked myself what I wanted to be. I never considered that maybe my focus on practical matters was actually a strength, not a weakness. Maybe my seriousness about our future was actually responsible, not boring. Maybe my so-called coldness was actually just emotional boundaries that were healthy and necessary. Rachel, please, let's go to counseling, let's work this out. I don't want to work it out, Marcus. I want to work on myself. I want to remember who I was before I started trying to be who you wanted me to be. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. You can't just throw away 8 years of marriage because of some hurt feelings. I'm not throwing away our marriage because of hurt feelings. I'm ending our marriage because I finally understand that it was built on an unequal foundation. I've been giving more than I've been receiving, financially and emotionally, and when I became exhausted from that imbalance, instead of addressing the root cause, you blamed me for not giving even more. That's not fair, isn't it? Let me ask you something, Marcus. When was the last time you thanked me for managing our finances? He opened his mouth, then closed it. When was the last time you acknowledged that my income has made our lifestyle possible? Silence. When was the last time you defended me when someone criticized me? Rachel, that's not. When was the last time you took responsibility for household tasks without being asked? I help around the house. You help when I ask you to help. You help when I've already planned what needs to be done and assigned you a specific task. That's not partnership, Marcus. That's delegation. I walked back to my desk and pulled out a folder I had prepared earlier in the week. These are the divorce papers. I'm filing on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. The folder hit the desk with a sound that seemed to echo through the office. Marcus stared at it as if it were a live snake. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Rachel, think about this rationally. Think about what you're giving up. Our house, our life together, our future plans. Our house that I helped buy with my down payment and my higher income? Our life together where I was constantly criticized for not being warm enough? Our future plans that I was solely responsible for creating and funding? I sat back down and opened the folder, pulling out the financial disclosure forms I had prepared. Actually, let me tell you what I'm giving up, in concrete terms. I'm giving up the right to continue subsidizing your lifestyle. I'm giving up the privilege of being criticized for my personality while supporting you financially. I'm giving up the opportunity to be called cold by people who depend on my warmth for their comfort. Marcus grabbed the papers and started flipping through them, his eyes widening as he saw the detailed breakdown of our assets and debts. According to Colorado law, marital assets are divided equitably, but individual contributions are taken into account. Since I contributed significantly more to our joint assets, and I can document that contribution, I'm entitled to a proportionally larger share of everything we own together. You can't take everything. I'm not taking everything. I'm taking what's mine. The house, for example, was purchased with a down payment that came from my savings account, and the mortgage has been paid primarily with my income. I'm entitled to the majority of the equity. Where am I supposed to live? That's not my problem anymore, Marcus. You're a grown man with a job. Figure it out. He slammed the papers down on my desk. This is about revenge, isn't it? You're trying to punish me for calling you cold? This isn't about revenge. This is about justice. This is about finally receiving fair compensation for years of underappreciated labor. This is about protecting my financial future instead of sacrificing it for people who don't value my contributions. What about Mom? She's living in our house. She doesn't have anywhere else to go. I had been waiting for this question. Patricia had been living in our house rent-free for 6 months, contributing nothing to the household expenses while criticizing my management of the household she wasn't helping to maintain. Your mother has options. She has her own savings, her own Social Security income, and her own house in Vermont that she could return to. She chose to move in with us, and you chose to let her stay without discussing it with me or asking her to contribute financially. She's grieving. She just lost her husband. And I'm sorry for her loss. But grief doesn't entitle her to free housing and meals while she criticizes the person providing them. She can grieve in her own home, or she can grieve in a place she pays for herself. Marcus was beginning to hyperventilate. You're destroying our family! I'm not destroying anything, I'm just refusing to continue funding it. I stood up and walked to the door, opening it pointedly. This conversation is over. You have the papers. Read them, have a lawyer review them, and let me know if you want to negotiate or if you prefer to let the court decide. Rachel, please? Goodbye, Marcus. He stood in the doorway for a moment longer, looking lost and desperate. Then he walked out, clutching the divorce papers in his hand. I closed the door behind him and returned to my desk, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Through the glass wall, I could see my colleagues trying to look busy while obviously dying to know what had just happened. Jennifer buzzed me on the intercom. Are you okay? I'm perfect, I said, and for the first time in months, I meant it. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal activity. Marcus hired a lawyer, as I had expected he would. His lawyer was a friend of his father's, an older man who specialized in personal injury cases, and had probably handled a divorce or two over the years, but who was clearly out of his depth when it came to complex financial disclosure. My lawyer, on the other hand, was someone I had worked with professionally for years. Sarah Chen was one of the best family law attorneys in Denver, and she specialized in high-asset divorces involving business owners and financial professionals. She understood exactly what I was trying to accomplish. This is one of the most thoroughly documented cases I've ever seen, she told me during our first official meeting. You have 8 years of financial records that clearly show the disparity in contributions. Most people don't keep this kind of documentation. It's my job to keep financial records, I said. I just never thought I'd need them for my own divorce. Well, you're in an excellent position. Colorado is an equitable distribution state, which means the court will divide assets fairly, not necessarily equally. Given your documentation of disproportionate contributions, you're likely to receive a significant majority of the marital assets. What about spousal support? Sarah smiled grimly. Given that you earn more than he does and you've been essentially supporting him throughout the marriage, there's no basis for him to claim spousal support. If anything, you could make a case that he owes you support, though I don't recommend pursuing that unless he becomes unreasonable about the asset division. He's already being unreasonable. How so? I pulled out my phone and showed her the text messages Marcus had been sending me. They had evolved from pleading to angry to threatening over the course of the week. He's claiming that I'm being vindictive and that I'm trying to leave him with nothing. He's also threatening to tell everyone we know that I'm a cold, heartless woman who abandoned her marriage over petty complaints. Sarah read through the messages, her expression growing more serious with each one. These threats to damage your reputation could actually work in your favor. We can argue that he's attempting to retaliate against you for exercising your legal rights. It supports the narrative that he doesn't respect your autonomy or your contributions to the marriage. Is there anything he can do to stop the divorce? Not really. Colorado is a no-fault divorce state, which means you don't need his permission or agreement to end the marriage. He can make the process more difficult and expensive, but he can't prevent it from happening. What about the house? That's where your documentation really shines. You can prove that you provided the down payment, that your income has paid the majority of the mortgage, and that you've been responsible for maintenance and improvements. The house will almost certainly be awarded to you, though you may need to buy out his small share of the equity. I left Sarah's office feeling more confident than I had since this whole process began. Marcus could threaten and plead and attempt to manipulate me, but the law was on my side, facts were on my side, numbers were on my side. And numbers, as I had learned in my professional life, didn't lie. That evening, I treated myself to dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown, something I hadn't done in years. I sat at the bar, ordered a glass of wine and the salmon, and watched the other diners. Couples on dates, business associates closing deals, friends celebrating promotions, people living their lives, pursuing their goals, prioritizing their own happiness. I realized that I hadn't prioritized my own happiness in years. I had been so focused on maintaining Marcus's comfort, managing Patricia's criticisms, and preserving the peace in our household, that I had forgotten what it felt like to make decisions based on what I wanted instead of what everyone else needed. The salmon was perfectly cooked, the wine was excellent, and the atmosphere was sophisticated and peaceful. I pulled out my phone to take a photo of my meal, something I occasionally did to share with friends, and then stopped. Who would I share it with? Most of my friends were couple friends, people Marcus and I socialized with together. I hadn't maintained many independent friendships during our marriage. That was something else I needed to change. I had allowed my marriage to consume my entire social life, just as I had allowed it to consume my financial independence and my sense of self. As I was finishing my wine, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it, but something made me pick up. Hello? Rachel? It's Patricia. Marcus's mother sounded different than I had ever heard her before. Uncertain, almost timid. The commanding tone she usually used with me was nowhere to be found. Hello, Patricia. I was wondering if we could talk. In person, I mean. There are some things I need to say to you. I was curious despite myself. What kind of things? I'd rather not discuss it over the phone. Could you come to the house? Or I could meet you somewhere if you prefer. The house. My house. That she had been living in rent-free while criticizing my management of it. The irony was almost amusing. I'll meet you at the Starbucks on Franklin Street in an hour, I said. Thank you, Rachel, I appreciate it. I finished my wine, paid my check, and drove to the coffee shop, wondering what Patricia could possibly want to discuss. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a cup of tea in front of her. She looked older than I remembered, more fragile. The commanding presence she had maintained in my house seemed diminished somehow. Thank you for coming, she said as I sat down across from her. What did you want to talk about? She took a sip of her tea, her hands shaking slightly. I wanted to apologize. I blinked, certain I had misheard her. I'm sorry? I wanted to apologize for the way I've treated you, for the things I've said, the criticisms I've made, for talks, not appreciating everything you've done for Marcus and for me. I stared at her, trying to process this completely unexpected turn of events. What brought this on? Reality, she said with a bitter laugh. The reality of trying to manage a household without you. The reality of watching my son panic when he realized how much he depended on your income and your management skills. The reality of understanding that I've been living in your house, eating food you paid for, and criticizing you for not being grateful enough for the privilege of supporting me. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is a check for $3,000. It's not enough to cover what I owe you for 6 months of housing and food, but it's what I can afford right now. I'll pay you the rest as soon as I can. I looked at the check but didn't touch it. Patricia, what's really going on? Marcus told me about the divorce papers, about the financial breakdown you showed him, about how much more you've been contributing to the household than he has. She paused, her voice becoming quieter. I had no idea, Rachel. I thought he was the primary breadwinner. I thought you were just supplementing his income. He never told you how much I earn? He told me you did well for yourself. But he made it sound like your job was just a nice bonus, not a necessity. When I saw the numbers he showed me, when I realized that you've been carrying the financial burden of our household while I criticized you for not being warm enough. She trailed off, shaking her head. I called you cold, Rachel. I called you cold when you were working overtime to support my son and me. I criticized you for being too focused on practical matters, when those practical matters were keeping us comfortable and secure. I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. This was the acknowledgement I had been hoping for, but it was coming too late to save my marriage. Why didn't Marcus tell you the truth about our finances? I think he was embarrassed. I think he knew that admitting how much he depended on your income would make him look like less of a man in my eyes. So he let me believe that you were just ungrateful for everything he was providing. And you believed him. I wanted to believe him. It was easier to think that you were just naturally cold than to admit that maybe you were exhausted from carrying burdens that should have been shared. We sat in silence for a moment, both lost in our own thoughts. "Is there anything I can do to fix this?" Patricia asked finally. "Anything I can say to Marcus to help save your marriage?" I shook my head. "It's too late for that. This isn't just about money, Patricia. It's about respect, appreciation, and partnership. Marcus has had opportunities to defend me, to acknowledge my contributions, to treat me as an equal partner. He chose not to take those opportunities. He loves you, Rachel. Maybe he does, but love without respect isn't enough. Love without appreciation isn't sustainable. Love without partnership isn't healthy." I picked up the check she had given me and handed it back to her. "Keep this. Use it to find your own place. You can't stay in the house after the divorce is finalized anyway." She took the check with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Rachel, for everything. I know you are, and I appreciate the apology. But sorry doesn't undo 8 years of being taken for granted." I stood up to leave, then turned back one more time. "Patricia, can I ask you something? If you had known the truth about our finances from the beginning, would you have treated me differently?" She was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "Honestly, probably not at first. I was so invested in seeing Marcus as the successful provider that I would have found other reasons to criticize you. But eventually, yes, I think I would have recognized what you were doing for us and been grateful instead of critical." "That's what I thought," I said, and walked away. As I drove back to my apartment, I reflected on the conversation with Patricia. Her apology was genuine and her acknowledgement of my contributions was validating, but it also highlighted how fundamentally broken my marriage had been. Marcus had allowed his mother to believe that I was financially dependent on him, which had given her permission to treat me as ungrateful and demanding. He had participated in a fiction that painted him as the successful provider and me as the cold, unappreciative wife. He had been so invested in maintaining his image that he had sacrificed my dignity and self-respect. That wasn't love. That was selfishness. My phone buzzed with another text from Marcus. "Mom told me about your conversation. Can we please talk? I'm ready to acknowledge everything you've done and make real changes." I deleted the message without responding. He wasn't ready to acknowledge anything. He was ready to say whatever he thought I wanted to hear to get his financial security back. But I was done being moved by his words. I was only interested in actions now, and his actions over the past 8 years had spoken louder than any promises he could make. The coldness they had accused me of was finally serving me well. It was protecting me from manipulation, from false promises, from the temptation to go back to a situation that had been slowly destroying my sense of self. If being cold meant having clear boundaries, making decisions based on facts instead of emotions, and prioritizing my own financial security and emotional well-being, then I was happy to be cold. In fact, I was discovering that I was very good at it. 3 months into the divorce proceedings, Marcus's desperation had reached new heights. The temporary court orders had been issued, and he was learning exactly what life looked like without my financial management. The house was being sold as part of the asset division, and he had 30 days to find alternative housing. Patricia had already moved back to Vermont, taking her sharp tongue and her newfound appreciation with her. I, meanwhile, had purchased a sleek downtown condominium with a view of the Rocky Mountains. The mortgage was entirely in my name, paid for with my income, and decorated according to my taste alone. No more beige walls chosen to please Marcus's conservative sensibilities. No more furniture arrangements designed to accommodate Patricia's comfort. Just clean lines, bold colors, and space that was entirely mine. The transformation in my life extended beyond my living situation. I had thrown myself into my work with renewed energy, taking on high-profile clients and complex financial restructuring cases that I had previously avoided because they required travel and long hours. Without the burden of managing Marcus's needs and Patricia's criticisms, I found I had both the time and the mental energy to pursue the challenging aspects of my career that I had set aside for the sake of domestic harmony. My reputation in the financial services community had grown considerably. Word had spread about my meticulous documentation of financial abuse in my own divorce case, and other attorneys had begun referring clients to me specifically for cases involving hidden assets and financial manipulation. I had become something of an expert in forensic accounting for divorce proceedings, a specialty that was both lucrative and personally satisfying. The irony wasn't lost on me that my so-called coldness, my obsessive attention to financial details, my methodical approach to record-keeping, had become valuable professional assets. The very traits that Marcus and Patricia had criticized me for were now earning me recognition and substantial fees from clients who appreciated precision and thoroughness. But Marcus was struggling to adapt to his new reality. Without my income supplementing his lifestyle, without my management of his finances, without my planning for unexpected expenses, he was drowning in financial chaos. The temporary support order required him to maintain the house until it sold, but he couldn't afford the mortgage payments on his salary alone. The utilities were being shut off regularly because he forgot to pay the bills. The yard was overgrown because he had never learned to maintain it himself. His credit score had plummeted within 2 months because he missed payments on the credit cards that were in his name alone. The car that he had purchased the previous year, thinking he could afford the payments because my income was covering most of our other expenses, was repossessed on a Tuesday morning while he was at work. His coworkers watched from the office windows as the tow truck hauled away his BMW, and by afternoon the entire sales team knew about his financial difficulties. I learned about these developments through my attorney, who received updates from Marcus's lawyer as part of the ongoing discovery process. Each new piece of information about his deteriorating situation confirmed what I had suspected all along. Marcus had been living far beyond his actual means, supported by my financial management and supplemental income, and he had mistaken this artificial lifestyle for his natural standard of living. The house sold quickly, which was both a blessing and a curse for Marcus. It provided him with his share of the equity, which amounted to about $28,000 after legal fees and real estate commissions. But it also meant he had to find somewhere to live, and his damaged credit made it nearly impossible to qualify for a decent rental. He ended up in a studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood, the kind of place I wouldn't have felt safe visiting even during daylight hours. The rent was $600 a month, which was all he could afford after his other obligations, and it showed. When I drove past it one evening, curious to see where my former husband had landed, I was shocked by how far he had fallen in such a short time. Meanwhile, I was thriving in ways I hadn't expected. The condo I had purchased was not only beautiful but also a smart investment. Property values in downtown Denver were rising rapidly, and I had bought at exactly the right time. My mortgage payment was actually lower than what I had been contributing to our previous household expenses, which meant I had additional money to invest in my retirement accounts and other financial goals. I had also begun dating, something I approached with the same methodical planning I brought to everything else in my life. I created profiles on reputable dating sites, clearly stating my financial independence, my career ambitions, and my expectations for partnership. I was explicit about not wanting to subsidize anyone else's lifestyle or manage anyone else's finances. The response was remarkable. I attracted successful, financially stable men who appreciated my independence and ambition rather than feeling threatened by it. I went on dates with doctors, lawyers, business owners, and other financial professionals, men who had their own homes, their own retirement savings, their own insurance policies, men who viewed my financial acumen as an asset rather than a character flaw. One evening, I was having dinner with Dr. James Morrison, a cardiologist who had been divorced for 3 years and had full custody of his 2 teenage children. We were discussing our respective experiences with financial management when he made a comment that stopped me cold. I have to say, Rachel, it's refreshing to date someone who understands money management. My ex-wife used to accuse me of being obsessed with finances, but I was just trying to plan for our future. She wanted to spend everything we made and more, and when I tried to establish budgets or savings goals, she would say I was being controlling and unromantic. I nearly choked on my wine. She called you controlling for trying to manage your finances responsibly? Constantly. She said I was too focused on money, that I didn't know how to live in the moment, that I was sucking the joy out of life with my spreadsheets and investment accounts. What happened? Eventually, I realized that we had fundamentally different values about money and planning. She wanted someone who would enable her spending without question, and I wanted someone who would partner with me in building a secure future. The marriage became unsustainable. I thought about Marcus and his complaints about my financial focus, and I realized that James and I had both been criticized for the same responsible behaviors that our respective spouses should have appreciated. The difference was that James had recognized the incompatibility and ended his marriage before it destroyed his financial security, while I had spent years trying to change myself to accommodate Marcus's unrealistic expectations. "Do you ever regret the divorce?" I asked. "Not for a second. My financial situation improved dramatically once I wasn't supporting someone who viewed my money as her money, but viewed her money as her money too. My stress levels dropped, my work performance improved, and I was able to focus on providing for my children without worrying about unexpected expenses from impulsive purchases." "How are your children handling it?" "Better than I expected. Kids are pretty smart about financial security even when they're teenagers. They understand that dad's careful budgeting means they can afford college tuition and family vacations and a nice house. They've seen what happens to their friends whose parents are constantly fighting about money, and they appreciate the stability." I found myself genuinely attracted to James, not just because he was handsome and successful, but because he understood the value of financial responsibility and didn't see it as a character flaw. He appreciated my career achievements, respected my independence, and never once suggested that I was too cold or too focused on practical matters. After 3 months of dating, he invited me to meet his children. 16-year-old Emma and 14-year-old Michael were polite but reserved, clearly protective of their father and wary of any woman who might disrupt their stable household. "Dad says you're a financial advisor," Emma said over dinner at James's house. "That's cool. I want to study business in college." "What kind of business interests you?" I asked. "Investment banking, maybe, or corporate finance. I like working with numbers, and I want to make enough money to be independent." James smiled proudly. "Emma's been managing her own savings account since she was 12. She's already saved more money than most adults have in their emergency funds." "That's impressive," I said, and I meant it. Financial independence is one of the most important gifts you can give yourself. That's what Dad always says. He says that people who don't understand money end up controlled by people who do. I glanced at James, recognizing the wisdom in that statement. Marcus had never understood money, which meant he had been controlled by my understanding of it without even realizing it. When I removed my financial support, he had found himself completely unprepared to manage his own financial life. As the months passed and my relationship with James deepened, I began to understand what a healthy partnership actually looked like. He didn't expect me to manage his finances, but he appreciated my expertise when he asked for advice. He didn't criticize me for being focused on our financial future, but instead contributed his own ideas and goals to our shared planning. He didn't take my independence for granted, but actively supported my career ambitions and celebrated my professional successes. The contrast with my marriage to Marcus became starker with each passing week. I had spent 8 years trying to be someone I wasn't, accommodating criticism for traits that were actually strengths, and subsidizing a lifestyle for people who not only didn't appreciate my contributions, but actively resented them. Meanwhile, Marcus's situation continued to deteriorate. His sales performance at work had declined dramatically as his personal financial stress affected his ability to focus. His manager had put him on a performance improvement plan, which meant he was at risk of losing his job entirely. He had borrowed money from his sister Linda to cover basic expenses, which had strained that relationship as well. He made one final attempt to reconcile with me about 6 months after. I filed for divorce. I was leaving my office building when I found him waiting by my car in the parking garage. He looked terrible, haggard, thin, with the desperate appearance of someone who had been living on stress and poor decisions for too long. "Rachel, please, just give me 5 minutes," he said before I could get in my car. I looked at him, this man I had once loved, and felt nothing but a detached sort of pity. "What do you want, Marcus?" "I want to apologize. Really apologize, not just say the words, but acknowledge what I did wrong, and ask for another chance." "Go ahead. I took you for granted. I took your financial contributions for granted, your management of our household for granted, your planning and your hard work, and your dedication to our future. I let my mother criticize you when I should have defended you. I called you cold when you were actually just exhausted from carrying burdens that should have been shared. He paused, waiting for some sign of softening from me, but I remained silent. I know now what you were doing for us. I know how much of the financial load you were carrying, how much of the mental labor you were handling, how much you were sacrificing to make our life comfortable. I was an idiot for not seeing it at the time. Yes, you were. I've learned how to manage my own finances now. I've learned how to pay bills and budget and plan ahead. I could be a real partner to you now, not someone you have to take care of. Marcus, you've learned how to manage your finances because you were forced to. You had no choice. That's not the same as choosing to be a responsible partner, but I could choose that now. I could choose to be the partner you deserved from the beginning. I unlocked my car and opened the door. The problem isn't that you didn't know how to be a good partner, Marcus. The problem is that you didn't want to learn while it would have benefited me. You only want to change now because the alternative is financial ruin. That's not true, isn't it? If I hadn't filed for divorce, if I had just continued to subsidize your lifestyle and manage your responsibilities, would you have suddenly developed an appreciation for my contributions? Would you have started defending me to your mother? Would you have begun handling your fair share of our financial obligations? He was quiet, and I could see the truth of my words sinking in. You had 8 years to appreciate what I was doing for you. 8 years to treat me as an equal partner instead of a service provider. 8 years to defend me when people criticized me for traits that were actually keeping us afloat. You chose not to do any of those things. People can change, Rachel. Some people can. But change that only happens when someone's financial security is threatened isn't real change. It's desperation. I got in my car and started the engine. Marcus knocked on the window, and I rolled it down a few inches. I love you, he said desperately. No, you don't. You love what I did for you. You love the lifestyle I made possible, the security I provided, the management I handled. But you never loved me enough to appreciate those things while you had them. I drove away, leaving him standing in the parking garage, and I felt a profound sense of closure. That conversation had confirmed everything I had realized about our marriage. Marcus hadn't fallen in love with me. He had fallen in love with the benefits I provided. And when I stopped providing those benefits with enough enthusiasm to satisfy him, he had decided there was something wrong with me, rather than something wrong with the arrangement. The divorce was finalized 2 weeks later. I received 68% of our marital assets, based on my documented higher contributions to our shared finances. The judge had been particularly influenced by my detailed financial records, and Marcus's inability to explain where his income had gone over the years. I walked out of the courthouse feeling lighter than I had in years. I was officially free from the obligation to subsidize someone else's lifestyle while being criticized for not doing it with enough warmth. I was free from the burden of managing another adult's responsibilities while being called controlling for doing so. I was free from the exhausting work of trying to be someone I wasn't in order to please people who were never going to be satisfied anyway. That evening, James took me out to celebrate. We went to the same restaurant where I had eaten alone 6 months earlier, when I first began to understand what my life could look like without Marcus's criticism and Patricia's demands. How does it feel to be officially divorced? He asked over champagne. Like I can finally breathe again, I said. Like I've been holding my breath for 8 years and didn't realize it until I could finally exhale. Do you regret any of it? The marriage, the divorce, the way it ended? I thought about his question seriously. Did I regret marrying Marcus? Not entirely, because that experience had taught me valuable lessons about my own worth and what I wanted in a partnership. Did I regret how long it took me to recognize the problems? Absolutely. But I couldn't change the past, only learn from it. I regret how much of myself I gave up trying to be someone else. I regret how long I accepted being criticized for traits that were actually strengths. But I don't regret ending it when I finally understood what was happening. What's next for you? I'm thinking about starting my own financial consulting firm, specializing in helping people who've been financially abused or manipulated. There are a lot of people out there who need help understanding their financial situations and protecting their assets. James raised his champagne glass. To Rachel Morrison, financial consultant and expert in giving people exactly the kind of cold shoulder they deserve. I laughed and clinked my glass against his. To being cold, calculating, and financially independent. 6 months later, I opened Morrison Financial Consulting, specializing in forensic accounting for divorce cases and financial planning for newly single individuals. My first client was a woman whose husband had convinced her that she was bad with money, while he secretly drained their joint accounts to fund his gambling addiction. My second client was a man whose wife had used his credit cards to finance her shopping addiction, while telling him he was too controlling for wanting to see the bills. My third client was Patricia. She called me on a Tuesday morning, her voice tentative and embarrassed. "Rachel, I know this is awkward, but I need help. I've made some financial mistakes since moving back to Vermont, and I don't know who else to turn to." I was surprised but not entirely shocked. Patricia had spent 6 months living in my household without paying attention to how the finances were actually managed. She had probably assumed that maintaining a household was simpler than it actually was. "What kind of mistakes?" I asked. I fell for a scam. A man called claiming to be from the IRS, and he convinced me to send money orders to pay supposed back taxes. I lost $12,000 before I realized it wasn't legitimate. I closed my eyes, feeling a mixture of frustration and sympathy. $12,000 was probably a significant portion of Patricia's savings. "Have you reported it to the police?" "Yes, but they say there's almost no chance of recovering the money. The scammers are overseas, and they used untraceable payment methods." "What do you need from me?" "I need help restructuring my finances so I can survive on what I have left. I need to understand how to budget and plan and manage my money the way you managed ours." The irony was almost overwhelming. The woman who had criticized me for being too focused on financial matters was now asking me to teach her those same skills, because she desperately needed them. "I charge $200 an hour for financial consulting," I said. "That's fine, I can afford it. For now." We scheduled an appointment for the following week. When Patricia walked into my downtown office, she looked smaller and more vulnerable than I had ever seen her. The commanding presence she had maintained in my home was completely gone, replaced by the uncertainty of someone who had realized she was in over her head. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, sitting across from my desk. "I know I don't deserve your help after the way I treated you." "This is business, Patricia. You need financial consulting, and I provide that service. Our personal history is irrelevant." I spent 3 hours reviewing her financial situation, and it was worse than I had expected. The scam had taken most of her liquid savings, but that wasn't her only problem. She had been spending money without tracking her expenses, making purchases based on emotion rather than budget, and she had no understanding of how long her remaining money would last. "At your current spending rate, you'll be out of money in 18 months, I told her bluntly. Her face went white. "What do I do?" "You learn to live within your means. You create a budget and stick to it. You track every expense and think carefully before making any purchase. You do all the things you criticized me for doing." "I'm sorry I criticized you for those things. I understand now how important they are. Your apology doesn't change anything, but your understanding might help you avoid future financial disasters." I created a comprehensive budget for Patricia, showing her exactly how much she could afford to spend in each category of expenses. I taught her how to track her spending, how to plan for unexpected costs, and how to avoid the emotional spending that had contributed to her current situation. "This seems very restrictive," she said, looking at the budget. "Financial security requires discipline. You can choose to be disciplined now, or you can choose to be broke later. Those are your options." She hired me to provide ongoing financial counseling, meeting with me once a month to review her spending and adjust her budget as needed. It was strange, teaching financial responsibility to someone who had once criticized me for being too responsible, but it was also professionally satisfying. Over the months that followed, Patricia learned to appreciate the skills she had once dismissed as coldness. She learned that budgeting wasn't about being restrictive. It was about having control over your financial future. She learned that tracking expenses wasn't obsessive. It was protective. She learned that planning ahead wasn't boring. It was empowering. "I owe you more than just payment for your services," she told me during one of our monthly meetings. "I owe you recognition that the traits I criticized you for are actually valuable skills that I desperately needed to learn." I'm not interested in apologies or recognition from our personal relationship, I said. But I am interested in helping my clients develop financial literacy and security. Still, I want you to know that I understand now what Marcus lost when he lost you. You weren't cold, you were competent. You weren't obsessed with money, you were responsible with it. You weren't controlling, you were creating stability. I nodded but didn't respond emotionally to her observation. Our professional relationship was working precisely because I maintained clear boundaries and didn't allow our personal history to interfere with my ability to provide objective financial advice. A year later, Patricia had successfully stabilized her finances and learned to live within her means. She had developed budgeting skills, expense tracking habits, and a healthy respect for financial planning. More importantly, she had learned to appreciate the value of the traits she had once criticized. Marcus, meanwhile, had filed for bankruptcy. His performance at work had never recovered, and he had eventually been terminated. He had borrowed money from multiple family members and maxed out his credit cards, trying to maintain a lifestyle he couldn't afford. The studio apartment had been foreclosed on when he stopped paying rent, and he had moved back in with his sister Linda, sleeping on her couch and doing odd jobs to earn enough money for basic necessities. I learned about his bankruptcy filing through my attorney, who received notification because our divorce decree required him to inform me of any major changes to his financial status. The man who had once criticized me for being too focused on money had destroyed his financial life within 2 years of losing access to my financial management. Linda called me once, asking if I would consider helping Marcus the way I had helped Patricia. I declined politely but firmly. Patricia had approached me as a client, acknowledging her mistakes and asking for professional help. Marcus had shown no indication that he understood his role in his own financial destruction, or that he was ready to take responsibility for changing his situation. "He's really struggling, Rachel," Linda said. "He's learned his lesson about taking you for granted." "No, he's learned that there are consequences for taking me for granted. That's not the same thing as learning to value partnership and mutual respect. Couldn't you at least talk to him? Give him some advice? Linda, your brother had 8 years to learn to value my financial skills and management abilities. He chose to criticize me instead. He had every opportunity to appreciate my contributions and defend me when others criticized me. He chose not to. I'm not interested in rescuing him from the consequences of those choices. But he's family." "No, he's not. He's my ex-husband. We have no relationship now except for the legal requirements of our divorce decree." I hung up, feeling confident in my decision. Marcus's financial problems were the direct result of his own choices and his own failure to develop basic life skills while he had the safety net of my support. Rescuing him now would only enable him to continue avoiding responsibility for his own life. Meanwhile, my relationship with James had continued to grow stronger. We had been dating for over a year, and the contrast with my marriage to Marcus couldn't have been starker. James appreciated my financial expertise, respected my career ambitions, and actively supported my independence. He never criticized me for being too focused on practical matters, but instead contributed his own planning and goal setting to our shared activities. When we decided to move in together, it was a negotiation between equals. We discussed how to divide household expenses based on our respective incomes, how to manage shared costs without compromising our individual financial independence, and how to support each other's goals without sacrificing our own priorities. "I want to contribute proportionally to household expenses based on our income difference," James said during one of our planning conversations. "You earn about 30% more than I do, so I think a 70-30 split would be fair. That works for me, but I want to maintain separate investment accounts and retirement savings. I never want to be in a situation where someone else's financial decisions can jeopardize my security." "Absolutely, I feel the same way. We can share household costs and maybe some joint savings goals, but our individual financial independence should never be compromised." It was a completely different approach to financial partnership than what I had experienced with Marcus. Instead of one person subsidizing the other's lifestyle, we were creating a system where both people contributed fairly and maintained their autonomy. Instead of financial discussions being sources of conflict, they became opportunities for collaboration and mutual support. 2 years after my divorce was finalized, Morrison Financial Consulting had grown into a thriving practice with 3 associate consultants and a waiting list of clients. I specialized in complex divorce cases and financial abuse recovery, but my team also provided comprehensive financial planning for individuals and small businesses. I had become something of a local expert on financial empowerment, giving talks at women's organizations and professional development seminars about the importance of financial literacy and independence. My story had spread through word of mouth, and I regularly received referrals from attorneys, therapists, and other professionals who worked with people escaping financially abusive situations. The speaking engagements were personally fulfilling because they allowed me to share the lessons I had learned from my own experience. I talked about the importance of maintaining individual financial identity even within marriage, the red flags of financial manipulation, and the process of rebuilding financial independence after a relationship ends. The most important thing I learned, I would tell audiences, is that traits like attention to detail, financial planning, and emotional boundaries aren't character flaws. They're survival skills. If someone criticizes you for being too responsible, too careful, or too protective of your resources, that's information about their priorities, not evidence of your shortcomings. After one of these presentations, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "My boyfriend tells me I'm too controlling because I want to keep my own bank account," she said. "He says couples should share everything, and that my desire for financial independence means I don't trust him." "How long have you been dating?" I asked. 8 months. "And he's already pressuring you to combine your finances?" "He says it would be more convenient, and it would show that I'm committed to the relationship." I gave her my business card. Financial independence isn't about lack of trust. It's about self-preservation. Someone who pressures you to give up financial autonomy is someone who benefits from your lack of autonomy. That's a red flag, not a romantic gesture. She thanked me and left, and I hoped she would take my advice seriously. I had learned too late in my own relationship how dangerous it could be to sacrifice financial independence for someone else's comfort. 5 years after my divorce, I was invited to speak at a conference for family law attorneys about financial forensics in divorce cases. My practice had become well known in the legal community, and several high-profile cases had established me as an expert in uncovering hidden assets and financial manipulation. During the question-and-answer session after my presentation, one attorney asked, "What advice would you give to someone who's been told they're too cold or too focused on money in their relationship?" I smiled, thinking about all the times Marcus and Patricia had used those exact words to criticize me. I would tell them that anyone who criticizes you for being financially responsible probably benefits from your financial irresponsibility. I would tell them that being called cold by someone who's been living off your warmth isn't an insult, it's information. And I would tell them that the best response to being called too focused on money is to focus on your money so effectively that you never have to depend on people who don't appreciate your financial skills. The audience laughed and applauded, and several attorneys approached me afterward to discuss referring clients to my practice. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since the morning Marcus first called me cold. I had gone from subsidizing someone else's lifestyle while being criticized for my methods to building a successful business based on those same methods. I had gone from being emotionally manipulated for my financial focus to being professionally celebrated for it. I had gone from a marriage where my contributions were taken for granted to a partnership where my skills were appreciated and respected. I had gone from trying to be someone else to please people who were never going to be satisfied to becoming more authentically myself and finding people who valued that authenticity. The coldness they had accused me of had become my greatest strength. It had protected me from manipulation, enabled me to make clear-headed decisions, and ultimately led me to a life that was more fulfilling than anything I had experienced during my marriage. If Marcus could see me now, I thought he would finally understand what he had lost. But more importantly, I understood what I had gained. I had gained the freedom to be exactly who I was, without apology or accommodation. I had gained financial security that was entirely my own. I had gained a career that utilized and celebrated the traits I had once been criticized for. And I had gained the knowledge that being called cold by people who depend on your warmth isn't a character flaw, it's a wake-up call. It's a sign that you've been giving so much of yourself that you've become depleted, and it's time to start prioritizing your own needs and well-being. The best revenge I had learned wasn't getting back at people who had mistreated me. The best revenge was building a life so fulfilling and successful that their opinions became completely irrelevant. The best revenge was discovering that the traits they had criticized were actually the foundation of everything good in my new life. Marcus had wanted me to be warmer, more spontaneous, less focused on practical matters. But warmth without boundaries becomes people-pleasing. Spontaneity without planning becomes financial chaos, and ignoring practical matters doesn't make them disappear. It just makes someone else responsible for handling them. I had learned to be selectively warm, strategically spontaneous, and unapologetically practical. I had learned to give my warmth to people who appreciated and reciprocated it, to be spontaneous in ways that didn't compromise my security, and to embrace my practical nature as a source of strength rather than a character flaw. The woman who had once been criticized for being too cold had become someone who understood exactly when coldness was the appropriate response. And I had become very, very good at it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.